It began on an ordinary Tuesday, on a stretch of beach where the only stories were the ephemeral sketches left by the retreating tide, faithfully erased twice a day. The air was thick with the salt tang of the sea and the plaintive cries of gulls. No one was expecting a parable. They were expecting another day of sun and waves. No one was expecting Anatoly. Yet he came, a silhouette against the vast, morning-lit horizon, his progress marked by the rhythmic, protesting clatter of the old wheelbarrow he pushed before him. Its single wheel carved a deep, meandering scar in the damp sand. He stopped at a point he seemed to have measured with his soul, a place precisely midway between the shifting dunes and the water's edge, a perfect fulcrum between the terrestrial and the eternal. With a final grunting exhale that spoke of more than just physical effort, he tilted the wheelbarrow. The stone, a great gray, unhewn thing, slid from its metal cradle and landed with a profound, earth-muffled thud. It settled into a shallow depression of its own making, as if the beach had been waiting for this very weight. For a long, suspended moment, Anatoly simply stood, his gaze fixed upon the stone, not with pride nor with sorrow, but with a kind of quiet finality. The deed was done. Then he turned on his heel, and without a backward glance, he walked away, the empty wheelbarrow bouncing lightly behind him, its clatter now sounding strangely, hauntingly hollow. The stone did nothing. It was utterly, profoundly inert, a slumbering leviathan of granite that seemed to absorb the very energy around it, the sound of the waves, the warmth of the sun, the curious glances of the passerby. It was a question mark hewn from the earth's own bones, a punctuation mark in the endless flowing sentence of the shoreline. And in its absolute stillness, it began to provoke a riot of answers. Was it art, a stark piece of land art challenging the curated galleries of the world? Was it trash, some colossal discard from a giant's project, an eyesore on nature's clean canvas? Was it a memorial, a cenotaph, for a love lost or a life lived, its story known only to the one who placed it there? Or was it simply a magnificent, inexplicable mistake? The beach, a realm dedicated to the ephemeral, to the dance of constant change, now hosted a permanent and perplexing guest. The tide, the ultimate eraser, could only lap at its base, unable to claim it. The stone simply was, and its silent, stubborn existence demanded a story from everyone who saw it. As the days turned into weeks, the stone's presence ceased to be a novelty and became a fixture. And with that permanence came the intellectual wrestling. In cafes and on evening strolls along the shore, the myth of Sisyphus was inevitably invoked. It was the most readily available archetype, the ghost that haunted any conversation about a man and his stone. Scholars and tourists alike found a comfortable, tragic poetry in the comparison. Here was another soul condemned to a futile, endless labor, a modern echo of that ancient punishment. But the more one truly considered it, the more the comparison revealed itself to be a profound and beautiful error. Sisyphus was the victim of a divine curse, his entire existence defined by a cycle he could not break. The roll of his stone up the slope was not an act of creation, but of obedience to a cruel sentence, its roll back down a symbol of absolute failure. His labor was defined by its repetition, its utter lack of a lasting result. Anatoly's labor, however, stood in opposition. It was not a cycle, but a period. It was a single, finite act, executed with a quiet and resolute finality. He was not punished. He was purposeful. He did not roll his stone in a desperate, sweaty struggle against gravity. He transported it. He delivered it. In one decisive motion of tilting the wheelbarrow, He had broken the classical cycle forever. His task had a clear and undeniable endpoint, the moment the stone met the sand and he chose to walk away. And walk away he did. Witnesses who saw him depart spoke of his posture, not the slumped shoulders of the defeated, but the easy, unburdened gait of a man who had completed exactly what he set out to do. The physical toil was complete, the weight relinquished. In that moment of his departure, the burden itself was transfigured. It was no longer the physical weight of the granite, a mass that could be measured in kilograms. It had become the metaphysical weight of meaning. Anatoly had not abandoned a task, he had completed his, and bequeathed the next one to us. The stone was now a silent, permanent question, and we, the community, the onlookers, the world, became its new custodians. It was now our collective endless task to push the stone not up a physical hill, but through the vast and winding landscapes of our own understanding. We were condemned not to futility, but to interpretation, to argue, to deconstruct, to worship, to revile, and to endlessly ascribe purpose to the purposefully placed. The stone was his statement, the meaning, our sentence. And then something remarkable happened. The slow, organic alchemy of human interaction began to work upon the granite. The object of confusion first became an object of utility. A lone jogger, breathless and stretching, found its broad, sun-warmed surface a perfect bench. A mother, her arms laden with beach toys, gently sat her toddler upon it to fasten the straps of a tiny sandal. Children, the first to accept the new reality, began using it as a base in their games of tag, their small hands slapping its familiar surface as they darted away with shrieks of laughter. Then, almost imperceptibly, it transitioned into an object of beauty. A local painter, captivated by the way the evening light caught its crystalline facets, set up an easel and tried to capture its stubborn presence against the soft sea. Someone else, on a misty morning, laid a single, weather-beaten sprig of driftwood against its base, a small silent offering. A photographer used its imposing form as a foreground anchor for a stunning shot of the Milky Way arcing over the ocean.
This was not a conscious decision, not a vote taken at a town hall meeting. It was a quiet, collective unfolding. The community had begun, almost subconsciously, to adopt it, to care for it. They would brush away sand from its surface or gently remove a piece of litter caught at its base. The stone was no longer an intrusion, a question mark demanding an answer. It was a feature, a landmark, a confidant to the solitary and a gathering place for friends. The burden of interpretation had not been lifted, but it had been joined by something warmer, a sense of unspoken, shared ownership. The stone was theirs. And in making it so, they had finally given it a name. In the end, the grand theories and intellectual debates collapsed, not with a shout, but with a whisper, under the overwhelming weight of a simple human truth. It was never a grand artistic statement conceived for a jaded world, nor a cryptic political protest carved in granite. It was something far more profound in its simplicity, something as elemental as the stone itself, an act of preservation. A son's final loving gesture in the face of an irrevocable tide. The story, when it finally trickled out, did not come from Anatoly himself. It was shared in hushed tones over a garden fence by an old neighbor. It was found in the yellowed pages of a local paper archived in the library, a photograph of a man and his young son building a house, their faces bright with future. The stone, it was revealed, was the hearthstone. It was the very heart of the old beach house where Anatoly had been raised. The house his father had built with his own hands, board by board, dream by dream, from timber salvaged from shipwrecks and stones gathered from that very shore. That fireplace had been the center of their universe. Its warmth had dried, soaked swimsuits, its light had read bedtime stories by, and its crackle had been the soundtrack to a childhood. But time, like the ocean, claims its own. The house, weathered and weary, had been sold. The new owners, developers with blueprints and bulldozers, were set to demolish it the following week to make way for a row of pristine, impersonal condominiums. Anatoly could not stop the future. He could not save the whole structure, the shell of his memories, but he could rescue its heart. With a rented truck and a friend's wheelbarrow, he had gone to the site one last time. He had pried the massive, soot-stained granite slab from the foundations of the hearth, a Herculean effort of muscle and memory. Every scratch on its surface was a familiar map. The dark, resinous stain in one corner was from a spilled pot of his mother's Christmas pine sap. While the house itself could not be saved from the relentless march of progress, he could rescue this one foundational piece. And so he gave it to the only thing he knew that was more enduring than memory, more patient than any man-made monument, the landscape itself. He returned the stone to the vastness from which it had once been quarried, embedding his most personal history into the timeless public cycle of the tide and the sky. He was not making a statement for others to decode. He was performing a ritual for himself. He was laying an anchor. The stone was no longer a question or a communal burden. It was an anchor, not just in the sand, but in time. It was a testament that some loves are so deep they require a geography of their own. In that single finite act, Anatoly was not Sisyphus. He was a son, saving a piece of his history and laying it to rest in the one sanctuary that would never be sold, never be torn down, and would forever remember the whisper of his father's name on the wind. The tide would forever ebb and flow around it, not as an eraser, but as a faithful witness, ensuring the story, now part of the land itself, would never truly be gone.